Welcome back to the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. The Great Lakes still gleam and sparkle, but their waters are heavy with the weight of what we've done. Algal blooms cloud once clear bays. Shorelines erode under rising waves. The lakes are the eternal vessels of what we've left behind. Aging pipes, invasive species, and poisoned fish. And it's all amid a warming climate. Feeding this system is the Detroit River, one of its vital arteries. It's moved ore and industry, waste and wildlife. A crossing, a corridor, a dumping ground. Now $1 billion cleanup is on the table. But this isn't just about sediment and sludge. It's about legacy and injustice and whether we can learn to care for what we once used thoughtlessly. Laura Rubin has spent years asking that question. She leads Healing Our Waters Great Lakes Coalition, and she joins us in the studio now. Laura, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Good morning, Robin. It's great to be here.
So when we talk about Michigan's waters, we often focus on the surface, the lakes, the rivers, the scenic views, the peace and tranquility that these waters bring to us. But when you look at the entire system, what do you see as the most urgent or overlooked threats to water health across the state?
Well, there are a lot of them. First, I want to thank you. That was a beautiful introduction. I think when most of us think of water and the Great Lakes, we think of our big Great Lakes, where we go to, Lake St. Clair and Lake Erie and Lake Michigan throughout. And then we think of our rivers. We rarely think of our groundwater, the water that is underneath us in the bedrock and, that's clean and cool. We also think we have plentiful water. And more as the climate is changing, we're seeing weather and water patterns changing, and we're seeing more periods of heavy, intense rains. But also on the flip side, we're seeing more periods of drought. Throughout Michigan, we've seen groundwater and wells that have dried up. And that's very unusual for us. We've seen agricultural interests that have drying up wells, drying up aquifers, hard to get to. So one of the biggest threats is that I think we in the Great Lakes region look at the plentiful water around us and think we don't need to worry about the amount of water. We all know we have to worry about the quality of our water and our drinking water in particular. But, things like that quantity issue is going to become a greater stressor on the region. Some of the historical contaminants we're cleaning up throughout the basin, but we're getting emerging contaminants, or we're learning about new contaminants. Lead in our drinking water is getting greater prominence, and we're trying to clean that up. But we've seen a predominance of PFAS, a chemical that is cropping up in all of our drinking water and in our rivers and our lakes and our streams. And so we continue to have some of these new pollutants and contaminants that are also arriving.
So the illusion of abundance is a real problem for us here in the Great Lakes region. I also want to go back to something you mentioned, which is groundwater, because it's really not part of the daily conversation, yet it's what so many people rely on for drinking water. And you've described it as a hidden crisis. Could you explain why and what's at stake if we continue to ignore it?
Yeah, I don't think people understand how much water we do get from our groundwater, or the function that when we infiltrate water, it cools our water and it also cleans it. So groundwater is a huge source of fresh, abundant water for us. It's something we also just don't understand as a state and in our science. We haven't really mapped our groundwater systems, so we don't know necessarily where our greatest aquifers are, how much quantity we have in them. And I think especially as climate is changing and our aquifers out west, the Ogallala aquifer that carries a lot of water for the west, is drying up. When we had something like last year, the wildfires in California, and we need more water, I think more and more of our country is going to be turning to the Great Lakes as a source of fresh, clean, safe water. We have more industry that's moving here. Clearly, from an economic point of view, we have a lot of the large data centers and a lot of the large manufacturing plants moving to the Great Lakes. The beer industry is a great example of that, of why they're situated here, is clean, safe, and fairly affordable drinking water, fairly cheap for them. All of those pressures are going to start to build, and we're going to start to see greater demands on the amount of drinking water, and it's going to become a greater issue for us and a greater threat that we really need to manage, where historically we haven't. In my past job at the Huron River Watershed Council, we did some polling of residents of what would inspire people or motivate people to conserve more water. And really, all of the conservation ethics and the values, whatever, they didn't hold up. It was really came down to the cost of water. And that's predominantly because we look around, we see a lot of wetlands, we see a lot of rivers, we see a lot of lakes. We don't think of needing to conserve water.
This is the Metro. I'm Robin Vincent. We're talking about the health of the Great Lakes and the Detroit River and how we can protect these vital resources for generations to come. Our guest is Laura Rubin of the Healing Our Waters Great Lakes Coalition. Now, there's been talk of the Great Lakes region as a future climate haven. And as you talk about the influx of industry and people that are coming to this region because of the abundance of water, this is a place where people are going to likely continue to migrate to escape the historic drought that is taking hold of the American West, the fires, the extreme heat. But talk a little bit more about what gets overlooked in that narrative, in that fallacy of calling the Great Lakes region a climate haven.
The one thing that jumps to mind that gets overlooked is water infrastructure and the state of our water infrastructure. The needs in the Great Lakes are tremendous. It's predominantly because we have older cities, we have manufacturing, our cities were built a long time. We haven't been keeping up our water infrastructure. Our water infrastructure needs are huge in the region. We had the bipartisan infrastructure law that gave a huge boost and inflow of money, but that is ending very quickly, and we don't see a Congress or an administration that looks like they're going to invest in water infrastructure. So failing water infrastructure is going to exacerbate, especially as population grows. We're going to start to see more expensive drinking water, and affordability is already a very serious issue in Detroit with water shutoffs. We're going to start to see more combined sewer overflows. We're going to start to see more flooding in basements, more sewage backups, flooding that shuts down our commerce and our transportation. So that is a huge issue that we really haven't dealt with. Also, we still have a lot of contaminated properties that we need to clean up, harbors, land contamination, et cetera. So we really need to address that. The other point I wanted to make, too, with groundwater, but it also is about flows, is wetlands. In the state of Michigan, we've lost over 70% of our wetlands. And most recently, about 2 years ago, in a Supreme Court decision, we lost a lot of protections afforded under the Clean Water Act for wetlands. So our wetlands are also being destroyed, and those are also, like aquifers and groundwater, key sources to hold water, to store it, and to prevent future flooding.
They're vital, and they're not necessarily something that's top of mind for people here when they're thinking about conservation, is protecting wetlands.
Exactly.
Now, you mentioned cleanup efforts, and that brings us to one of the reasons that we wanted to talk with you today, which is that the Detroit River has $1 billion cleanup effort that seems to be taking shape. Now, communities along the Detroit River, especially in places like Southwest Detroit, have long lived with pollution and environmental neglect. Can cleanup efforts like these become true models of environmental justice? And what needs to happen to get there?
I hope so. In many cases throughout the region, we have seen very good examples where cleanup has also really improved the quality of life, the workforce in those regions, and allowed people to stay in place and access the wonderful opportunities that we have in the Great Lakes. You know, the Detroit River is a great example. Over $50 million has been invested in cleaning up the Great Lakes, and that's a huge coordination and collaboration effort between the federal government, the state, and local government. The federal government has infused a lot of money in the cleanup, but states and local partners have also contributed. What we want to make sure, though, is that when we are cleaning up these areas and then reinvigorating them with businesses, with trails, with access to parks, that we aren't driving out the people who originally lived there. The people who have been living with the burden of that pollution should be able to benefit.
And that's called something that you mentioned to me yesterday, blue-green gentrification. In the last, 30 seconds that we have here, yes, how do we avoid repeating that pattern along the Detroit River?
First, we have to make sure that community and voices are involved in the cleanup processes and envisioning what they want the cleanup to look like so that they have access, so that they can envision a future that looks like what they want to see, so that they can be trained to help with the cleanup. You know, there's a lot of workforce development in cleanup remediation, in green infrastructure. So training those individuals to do the cleanup themselves and then really making sure that, you know, we have, whether it's through zoning or whether some tax incentives, people are allowed to stay there as, you know, the area starts to gentrify and beautify.
Laura Rubin is the director of Healing Our Waters Great Lakes Coalition. Laura, thank you so much for joining us today on the Metro.
Thank you for having me.
Metro is hosted by Robin Vincent and Tia Graham. The show is produced by Sam Corey, Kerry Jr. II, and Jack Philbrand. Our senior producer is David Lyons. Our engineer is Nate Bender. Music and creative audio production by Sam Bobian. The Metro is a production of WDET, a listener-supported service of Wayne State University. This is 1019 WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation.